hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. There's so much going on in the world. I don't want to be deceived. Lord, don't let me be deceived. We are the Tribulation Saints. Is there a Planet X, a Nibiru out there somewhere that we don't know about? What does the Bible say? Because personally, this isn't my normal line of ministry, but I've had people request me to make a video about this topic. I think it's important that we remain well-rounded in our studies and understanding in the knowledge of God, and go to the scriptures and find out, is there any evidence for this phenomena? There has to be something in the Bible for me to want to study or believe in or ponder for very long. And there are scriptures in the Bible that indicate that there could be a planet out there. Check these out. Nevertheless, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. So I'm not going to go into it any further than these passages and this one video. Get back to the other things I do, and we're going to focus on the tribulation time, preparing you for what's coming. But this could be something that plays into the tribulation hour, into the great deception that's coming, into Revelation chapter 10. Remember, John wrote something when the seven thunders uttered their voices that he was not allowed to write. So God said, do not write that. What is that all about? Check the scripture out. Revelation chapter 10, and I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a white cloud, and a rainbow was in his hand, and his face was like the sun, and his feet were pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book opened, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot upon the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, seven thunders uttered their voices. And when the seven thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered, and write them not. So you can see there are some things that are coming in this last generation that we are not fully aware of. Does Planet X fit into that? Could be. What about the UFO phenomena? What does the Bible say about that? All these pieces to the puzzle, as far as I'm concerned, are part of the great deception that's coming to those who do not love the truth. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Look at this. Because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, God himself will send a strong delusion into the world, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So all I'm going to do here is an attempt to make a video, putting the pieces together the way I see it, based on the scriptural evidence that I have, so that we can have some light on the subject. How does all these unusual topics, how does this stuff fit in to what we know to be true, so that we can stay on the narrow path and not get deceived? So check this out.
We are live with Bob Fletcher.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Brother Bob, we're here tonight to talk about one of the greatest conspiracies that's probably in the last 100 years at least. Planet X is making a comeback right now. From what I have researched, from 1900 until now is when it really started coming to the surface, and more specifically, it seemed like after 1970 into the mid-'80s it was really talked about, and then it disappeared, and now it's making a comeback. So let's just take a moment and talk about, because I believe Planet X is tied into the sixth seal in Bible prophecy. I believe it is probably almost sure what causes that sixth seal. But could you just let's open it up there,
sure,
and let's talk about Planet X, and just give me all you know on the subject. And where did it start with you?
That'll take a couple of months, but let's just scrape on the surface today. About 3 years ago, I started looking at something that had been brought to my attention by several people, and it was basically the fact that there was huge, not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars, and even trillions of dollars with a T, disappearing out of the Fed budgets. So we're talking much more money than I was used to chasing. We used to chase in these variety of corrupted operations. You chase a million or 10 or even $20 million, trying to track that down. When they would, it would show up, let's say, disappeared out of a budget. But a couple of years ago, a fellow named Donald Rumsfeld, who was in charge at that time at the Defense Department, he came forward during a congressional inquiry, and he said that $2.3 trillion had vanished from the Defense Department budgets over a period of a few years.
Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T.
Now, the amount we're talking about now, by the way, 2.3 trillion is the equivalent to writing a check to every man, woman, and child in the United States of America for about $5,000. That's how much 2.3 trillion is. And Donald Rumsfeld, very calmly sat before the Congress and said that that money was missing. They didn't quite know where it was, coming out of defense budgets. Well, the senators and the congressmen, of course, were set back on that. You know, I mean, they're, like I say, they're used to stealing a few million here and there. When you start talking that kind of money, that's pretty serious.
Because this is what's happening, ladies and gentlemen. Every so often, Rumsfeld comes out and goes, I don't know where. I don't know when. But something awful is going to happen. Thank you. That's all for today. No further questions.
Now, what happened, coincidentally, and it is not coincidental, but what they claim to be a coincidence, that was about 1 day or 2 days before the 9/11 terrorist activity in New York and in the Pentagon. So when 9/11 took place, a day or so after, Donald Rumsfeld admitted that they had lost $2 trillion. Obviously, we never heard the story again. It just disappeared into the smoke of the Twin Towers building in New York City. So the announcement was rather well-timed because it just vanished. So following that, some folks had brought, of course, to my attention the fact that Mr. Ron Paul in the Washington, D.C. had come forward and had asked the Federal Reserve System if he could get an audit on the gold, because the gold out of Fort Knox has been rumored to be gone. It is gone. There is no gold in Fort Knox any longer. And when Ron Paul came forward on the floor of the Congress, the Senate. He asked for have an audit of the gold to make sure that it was all still there, and they told him to simply go away.
You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Because the Congress and the Senate has no right to even look into the Federal Reserve operations. They cannot request. We cannot request through the Senate or the Congress an actual legitimate audit of all the Federal Reserve gold that supposedly is in Fort Knox. Now, what also happened within a few months, of course, we can remember back 2010, that period of time, 2008, was when the world banks were in a serious financial crisis. You had Greece, and several of these countries are actually on the border of bankruptcy. And the Federal Reserve in America had to lend them money and put money into bolster up the international banking finance, or it was all going to crash. And that was back around 2010, around that period of time. Now, at that time, Germany and several other nations had come forward and had asked the Federal Reserve the same thing that Ron Paul had asked. And that was, we need an audit because the foreign banks, a lot of people, if you're not into this, you would not know it, the foreign banks around the world for many years have put billions and billions of dollars of gold bullion from their different nations around Europe and around the world, South America, etc. They had deposited tons of gold in the Federal Reserve. When Germany and 6 or 8 other nations came forward in about 2013, 2011, that period of time, they came forward and they said, we need to take some of our gold out of Fort Knox and put it back into our own reserves here so we can stabilize our financial condition. Guess what happened? The Federal Reserve System told those countries that they could not have any gold out of Fort Knox. And the best that they could do for those countries was to give them an audit of the gold, but that would not be until 2020. So, at that point in time, now this is a couple of years ago, it really red flagged for me. I thought, wait a minute, something really is rotten in Denmark. We have all this money disappearing from standard legitimate funding out of Washington, just vanishing. And then we have the gold at Fort Knox is gone. I mean, it's gone. If it was there, they would show it to the appropriate people, and they're just not doing that. You know, when you're talking about trillions of dollars vanishing, and then you look at the rest of the scene, for example, changes that had taken place for 20 years with the space program being very, very different from what it originally was, and the expansion of what they called continuity of government within the United States, and the fact that they were arming the police departments with military weapons all over the United States, it started to really bother me. It was a matter of what is going on? What is it that would cause these guys, who usually steal what they want to, cover it up, and build them a new home in Tahiti or something for vacations and get away with it? But now they've changed direction. Then I remembered in the 90s, I had several people contact me, and they said, Bob, I have films of the construction of underground facilities all over the United States.
Our black budget, for instance, garners $1.023 trillion every 2 years. It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide. Each one has an average cost of 17 to 19 billion dollars.
And that came to me from several people. Some of them were truck drivers who told me fantastic stories about having an 18-wheeler, 40-foot truck filled with foodstuffs being delivered into a government facility, and they would follow the map where they were supposed to go, and there was nothing out there. Let's say it was outside of Texas in the desert area, and they would go, and the side of a mountain would open up, and they would drive down inside of a mountain, and it would close behind them. Now, those are fantastic stories, but to me, back in the 90s, they were just that. To myself, that was almost an outrageous kind of a story. They would tell me about going into an underground facility in Tennessee and driving for 600 miles under the ground. Those things were a little mind-boggling and pretty fanciful type of a report for me. So I kind of put it on the back shelf. These people sent me pictures, and they sent me what were VHS videos at that time, but I didn't know what to make of them. It didn't mean anything, so I sort of put it on the side burner, so to speak, the back burner. But again, now this is about 3 years ago, I started putting all of the dots connected all of the dots. And what had taken place in approximately 83, apparently with the launching of a new infrared telescope being put way out in the far reaches of the solar system. Apparently, Planet X, or the planet called Nibiru, which is mentioned in all the biblical writings, it's mentioned in all Bibles and scriptures from many foreign nations. It's mentioned in historic writings of the Chinese emperor 2,000 years ago. It's written on the side of the walls of temples that were 4,000 years old. There was a study done a while back of the clay tablets that were from Sumeria that had been completely broken down and analyzed by a man named Sitchin, S-I-T-C-H-I-N, and he had deciphered clay tablets. There's 25,000 of these tablets. They actually went back 4,000 years, and they described Nibiru, the planet X, and its relationship to coming back like Halley's Comet, coming back and going around the sun every once in a while, and then going way back out again in orbit, way out past Pluto, and coming back again in a couple thousand years. And this coincided with the biblical talk. It was called wormwood in the Bible, and it's described in, like I said, a whole multiple of biblical scriptures of sorts, coming from around the globe, 2,000, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, in the case of the Sumerian clay tablets. So what they described is Nibiru being a planet in a huge elliptical orbit, similar to that. Like I say, I compare it to Halley's Comet that comes by every 75 years. There's another comet that we recently discovered that came around in 1997. That was called the Hale-Bopp Comet. It is similar to Halley's Comet, except that the orbit that the Hale-Bopp Comet is in has been calculated to be 4,200 years. Now that's 600 to 800 years longer than the proposed orbit of Nibiru, or Planet X. So originally I thought, wow, you talk about 3,000 year, 3,600 year orbit of a planet. That's really amazingly large. I thought almost that was ridiculous. But once I realized and got into it and found out that We did have the Hale-Bopp comet of 4,000 years. Well, then that took my excuse, looking like it was a crazy number. That just erased that. So I started studying the people that really have been into studying the planet X or Nibiru for many, many lifetimes, or a long time, or following up on other people's studies. And there's several people that have spent their entire last 30 or 40 years just studying the astronomical potential of Planet X. Now, and get back to where I was. In 1983, apparently it was discovered sufficiently that scientific people at a very high level came into President Reagan and George Bush, the vice president, and said, we got a problem. It looks like now we found Planet X that's been talked about, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning. It's been talked about at least, and written about, of course, going way back, but in modern times, in 1960 and 50, there was writings about it in Life magazine and Reader's Digest and Lookton magazine, all the major media of that time in the 50s and the 60s. But apparently around 83, Ronald Reagan and his people were told that this is on its way back in and that it had been discovered, and now what are we going to do? All right, so at that point it changed everything in Washington. And what you had now was this handful of large numbers of, I'm going to refer to them all as, excuse me, criminal, corrupted persons out of government, and they decided that what we have to do, obviously, is if this thing's coming back, we've got to expand underground facilities that are going to hold enough people so that our families and our immediate most important wealthy people of the United States are going to have a place to hide. They called it continuity of government. And they built 103 of these underground facilities underground in the United States. When I started investigating, I ended up being able to get plenty of information on them, including most of the locations. Additionally, we have live footage and photographs of the underground facilities. Again, not all of them. Most of them, of course, are secret to above top secret in their classification. I also started looking into it to find out what the status was on other foreign nations, because something of this sort, coming back, a biblical event that will devastate the globe, obviously has to be known also to the highest levels of other governments. What I found out is that Russia in 2010 put out a mandate that by 2015 that they would have 5,000 underground facilities prepared for as many people as they could in Russia. I found out they had one large facility. Actually, they have several large, but one of them's big enough to hold as many as 30,000 or 40,000 people underground. I discovered that the European major nations have been also building underground facilities. And then I also discovered, which anybody can look up because it is part of public information in general, you can look up what's called the Seed Vault of Norway or Denmark. They have built a giant international cooperative seed vault, maintains billions of seeds in the to be hidden away. It's underground in the side of a mountain. You can look it up on a computer. Just put International Seed Vault and you can find it yourself on the computer. This is a storage facility maintaining all of the necessary seeds to reseed the globe, the entire face of the earth, or as much as they want or can, after the complete devastation similar to the original floods of Noah, which is what Nibiru, Planet X, will potentially bring upon the globe when it comes close to the Earth. Now, I'm going to take a brief pause here, get a drink of water, and if you have any questions up to this point in time, feel free to shout them out at me and let me know what you would like to ask.
Absolutely, Brother Bob. I'm telling you, this is getting better and better by the minute. Wormwood in the Bible, to me, is more referring to a meteor falling into the waters, and I don't believe it's specifically talking about Planet X. However, Doug Elwell, author, says, author of the Planet X and the Sign of the Coming of the Son of Man, says he sees Planet X in the Bible through his understandings of Scriptures. Now I myself, I draw more of a speculative conclusion that the apocalyptic events in the Bible that are talked about in the Tribulation are brought about by Planet X. I can't say I can see it clearly in the Scriptures, although I do believe it can be theorized that Planet X is the cause for some of the biblical events talked about concerning Bible prophecy, and that's I do have that theory. Because
however, this is going to answer your question, and it fits both case situations. First off, it's not going to be a theory. All right, it's been researched sufficiently that the Planet X has come around several times in the past. Now, and when it has happened, it has varied in the degree of devastation. However, it has come around several times, and this is documented geologically, etc. But here's what you're looking at that fits both, or actually 5 situations, if you will, but at least the 2 that you mentioned. And it's not a matter of theory in terms of the wormwood and meteors falling.
Sure, because that's the case right there. That is going to happen.
Right. And now I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to happen, according to putting together all of the dots, connecting all of the dots, not only political, historical, biblical, and non-biblical scriptures written on the top of the mountains by the Tibetan monks that recorded it when it came around, and the emperors of China that wrote it down. And there's a fellow named Gil Bouchard who has done unbelievable, wonderful investigations on the biblical side of this and can explain a day-to-day description of when it has passed previously and what had taken place and what will take place once again when it passes around the sun and back out. When Planet X or Nibiru comes around, the difference is, number one, it is a solid mass 5 times the size of Earth. It will cause an eclipse of the sun for a period of time. It has 3 or 4 planets that are actually, I'm going to refer to them as moons, that travel with it and travel around it, similar to the situation with our moon relative to Earth. The moons will be dragged around with Nibiru at the same time. And then we will have a tail of debris being dragged along, gravitationally sucked along behind this the primary planet Nibiru. When it comes by, it will travel behind the sun. The Earth, on its regular rotation around the sun, will in fact pass through the tail of Nibiru. When it does that, you will have the equivalent of the biblical meteorites that fell upon the earth in hail and brimstone. They didn't know how to describe it, but basically we're going to have flaming meteors of different sizes, meteorites, crashing. Actually, we will be crashing through that debris. It will take about an hour travel time to pass through it, going around the sun, and it will take about 155 days for Nibiru to come out the other side and head back towards outer space once again, not to come back for some unknown period of time. Because if it comes during our lifetime, we are the ones that will have to face whatever it will bring with it. And all of the debris that will hit Earth when we go through the tail of that thing, actually we will plunge through the tail. Since 1983, which is a period of time when this, I believe, the realization really settled in to the bad guys in Washington that this was a reality and was going to change their lousy, corrupted plans, because all of a sudden they had to worry about survival of their own families. So it changed things from just plain stealing and going about their normal one world government concept. This sort of threw a monkey wrench into it. The wealthiest are all digging holes to go underground. They have them finished for the most part. They're continuing them, making them better, making them bigger, and making them more full with survival materials and foods for themselves in the United States and all the rest of around the globe. See, that's all amazingly biblical. If people don't realize that and how biblical that is, they might as well just go back to sleep and have another drink, because they're just not paying attention. They might as well just go back to sleep and have another drink. Because they're just not paying attention.